Everybody, thank you for coming. This is the Metrics Matter session on QoE and how people are using their data and what they found useful. So I'm Matt McClure. I'm one of the founders of Mux. That's a surprise at quality of service startup. And I've also started a community called Demuxed, which is like an engineering-focused conference. So if you guys find yourself in the Bay at the end of the year, check us out. So yeah, let's get started with some light introductions. We'll start all the way on the left with the most businessy of us in this suit.
Hello. So my name is Flavio, and I work on the video department of the New York Times. I'm basically working on the engineering projects, so I work with basically technology around like video player development, video delivery, live streaming, and everything related to the technology stack for video at the New York Times.
Nice. I'm Brian Kaiser. I'm the CTO of Hudl. A lot of people haven't heard of Hudl, but we're a sports video analytics company, software as a service. We work from elite teams. Think, we have 29 to 30 NBA teams in the EPL, English Premier League, down to kind of high schools. And our users are a small number of users compared to these other companies, but they're quite engaged. So we did about 4.5 billion video views last year on the platform across it.
Hi, I'm Zach Shenker. I'm a principal video software engineer at CBS Interactive, working on our central video technology group, consolidating video infrastructure between the 30-plus business units delivering video. So we work on transcoding, players, delivery, and other video infrastructure.
I'm Matt Fisher. I am the lead engineer of Player Core at Vimeo.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. So just to start off with kind of a level set, would you guys mind telling us what tools you guys are using on your stack for monitoring? And it doesn't have to be like quality of service specific necessarily. This could be error tracking or anything along those lines, specifically for your video stack.
Yeah, should I start?
Sure. You are wearing the jacket.
So yeah. So basically, we do have a stack for like insights and stuff. So we do like Google Trends to see what is like the competition is doing like around like articles and news. We have Chartbeat to see like what's like going well, what's not going well at the website as a whole. Like, and this includes the like player and playbacks and everything, and page views. We do Google Analytics for more like granular events. So on the Google Analytics, we have like the number of bufferings, like the number of like ads that we are printing and everything else. And we also have like in-house implementation of event tracker to track all of the different metrics around the playback experience.
Nice. Yeah, we collect a lot of our own analytics and feed them into Sumo Logic. And so we ingest every piece of video view data into that, and we have a bunch of in-house dashboards that we look at that we can talk about the metrics later. We also use Ubora, which allows us to do a lot of pivoting and filtering, especially we look at geography a lot. We have a very global nature to our company, so we're looking at performance in different geographies and then how we can optimize for it. And then a lot of that feeds our decisions into Sidexis. So we get analytics and decisions to Sidexis to actually try to affect our routing depending on where we can for the traffic. Those are three primary tools.
Great. For us, as part of the sort of central video team, we support a number of different sort of analytics tools like Conviva and Mux and sort of various other Omniture and various other places that we're able to send tracking events and data into. And then it's up to each of our business units to decide which of the tools that we support they want to utilize.
The solutions at Vimeo are built in-house off of an Elasticsearch cluster, allowing us to surface that data through multiple front ends such as Kibana or Grafana to allow us to dig into that information in its most raw or pure form, I guess you could say.
Cool. So it sounds like varying range from more on like the engagement side of things, all the way to like custom everything, I presume. But I'm curious how you guys generally use this data. And how often, basically? Or is somebody on the team dedicated to some of this stuff? Where does that fall in your engineering priority timeline?
Yeah, I mean, for insights around news, we use the newsroom uses all of the tools the whole day to be looking at, as I already said, the insights and the breaking news and everything. When it comes to video playback and stuff, we have a weekly digest of what happened during the last week. And for the live streaming events, we are still using some of the analytics from Akamai. So when we have live streaming events, which is becoming more and more popular at the New York Times, we are trying to follow the live streaming event during the live stream, so we can look at what's going on and what are the levels on the adaptive bit rate that the people are watching, and yeah. But we don't have a clear graphic about what's happening based on the geography which seems to be really interesting.
Yeah, I would say it kind of depends. We have a video team, and they're really focused at basically maintaining quality. So they'll have one-to-many dashboards up that are just literally up in monitors in their area. So just kind of making sure that things make sense and we're not seeing any crazy anomalies. When we really start to dig into the metrics is when something goes wrong, honestly. So if we see traffic really drop in the Philippines or our buffer rate spikes, so we're going to dig in and try to figure out, is it us, is it them, what's going on using the tools at our disposal. And then the second time I think we really use it is when we're making a purchase decision. So when we're figuring out, to be blunt, what CDN we're going to be going with, having that data is a very, very important part of our decision process and understanding the push and pull on it.
Yeah, I think for us, again, it sort of depends a lot on some of the different business units. For some of the larger businesses where video is sort of very core to their business and they have a larger engineering team, they're certainly heavily utilizing these metrics tools, constantly monitoring them, constantly having feedback with our CDN vendors when they do see issues, or with us on the player team, and trying to sort of have an interaction there. With some of the smaller businesses, there may not necessarily always be as much insight there. And then certainly at other companies, I've, as an engineer, worked directly with a lot of these metrics tools to sort of rely on alerting systems and use things like that to identify when error rates are spiking or rebuffering spiking, and then trying to sort of follow up and engage from there.
Yeah, well, being that video is core to the business at Vimeo, from the top down, the business element is always curious as to how the product's growing, how it's succeeding. There are, generally specific metrics that are viewed from that perspective. Boiling that down into product development, obviously, prior to laying the groundwork for new product development, it's always nice to see the insight to where changes could affect things and creating expectations around that. And then down to the engineering level around video, that is where we start really looking at it, especially from my perspective, on a daily basis, kind of like a 24/7 kind of monitoring. Again, with built-in dashboards, insight into how our changes are affecting the product day to day with every release, monitoring changes through like A/B testing, and using metrics to get some clarity around changes with potentially less negative impact to the end user. And yeah, that's something that we're consistently always looking at, trying to determine health, whether it's related to a release or not. The issue of autonomous anomaly detection is always a big burden. So that is where you're kind of trading off the request for autonomy, but always utilizing people's eyes to really dig in and reassure ourselves that everything is going fine.
So, Zach, you have kind of a unique position at the table because you guys from what I understand, your team kind of sits above above all these other properties.
Yes.
So how much autonomy do these properties have in terms of the video stack? And then I guess since all of them kind of have the decision, it sounds like, to choose their own tools, such as Convivo or Omniture or whatever they decide to use for tracking. How does that affect your job specifically and your team's work?
Yeah, so certainly in some areas for us, we don't necessarily always have insights for all of our businesses into sort of QoS and QoE sort of metrics. If a business decides at this point not to integrate some of that technology, or work with the partners to enable utilizing these systems, then we can be a bit in the dark as to sort of performance of some of these at the moment. We do also have centralized data teams that are able to sort of analyze and collect some of the tracking events, and then sort of produce reports and analyze some of that data. But most of that at the moment isn't a real-time process. So certainly for our team, there is interest in being able to get sort of more global oversight across all of our businesses, and sort of use that then to drive decisions around how we optimize our video delivery and overall how we can improve our user experience.
Cool. So it sounds like it's a little bit more asynchronous then, like data comes in, central team reviews, and then like I assume there's like reports, and then you guys make decisions based on that. So it'd be like not this graph spiked, and then 10 minutes later like a team's working on it, but a little bit more like.
Yeah. There certainly are some teams that are always actively monitoring these things, and for them, they'll often then directly engage with vendors to try and resolve issues. But in other cases, it is more of, if it ever happens, if anyone notices some of these problems, it may be a bit later. But then, certainly for us as well, understanding things like ad impressions and ad performance and all of that is, very critical to a lot of our businesses. We have a lot of business models that, go all the way from subscription to AVOD to various sort of forms of delivery.
Cool. And Matt, you mentioned kind of like a bit of a trigger word here around A/B testing. So I'm interested to hear more about how you guys specifically use it, and if the rest of you implement things like that around like releases or just in general.
Yeah, sure. I think at face value, releasing big changes or small changes and going about that in a way to mitigate potential issues is obviously an intelligent decision. With a large user base, a small change can have a massive impact. And being able to get a solid understanding around what we're changing, how it affects everybody, and specifically why it is affecting them is extremely important. It's also a trade-off in the time spent releasing new changes. Sometimes there is major benefit to take a couple steps back and realize what's going on, despite how interested you are to release a change to the entire site population. But in terms of metrics allocation, this can be done as easily as just creating a tag between two iterations of a player. If that's done, then we can easily start looking at the same metrics segregated by this single tag, which is the easiest way to look at it. On top of that, we can start A/B testing new features within A/B tests. And that becomes a little bit more complicated, but nevertheless, it's still the same flow. And we can verify, again, changes and their success, all their success metrics.
Cool. Anybody else have a sophisticated A/B testing?
At the times we are basically trying to make more decisions based on A/B, especially because the decision making sometimes is really hard due to the amount of stakeholders. So for example, on the homepage, usually like we have a lot of stakeholders around it. So we are trying to drive the decisions based on A/B tests. And we do have a A/B framework implemented, like in-house, and we probably, like, it's an ongoing project right now, so we're gonna deploy our first A/B test for the video platform, like near the mid of this year probably. And yeah, I mean, it takes more time to implement features based on A/B because basically you need to implement twice. So especially like in this case where we're trying to see if people likes to watch the videos inline or if it's better to have this overlay that Facebook is doing, for example. So this kind of stuff, we need to do an A/B test and decide based on numbers.
Yeah, I would say we don't do as much A/B testing as I'd like today, to be really honest with you. We do some around major features, so like overlay is a great example, so we'll do A/B testing on that. But in terms of a little more tactical changes in our player, we don't A/B test right now. I'd like to. We do really rigorous release tracking and comparing performance before and after releases. So that's something I think we do a good job with, and it's amazing what pops up sometimes. Like, you know, for us, we're a little, I think, slightly different that we have these coaches that are in there and they're seeking a lot in the video. So you have a whole game and you're moving back and forth. So it's not unusual for a coach to have 200 seeks in a video as they're moving between it, which I don't think a lot of players prioritize seeking up very much, honestly. And so for us, we measure seek time very carefully. And we had a release that dropped 200 milliseconds off seek time, for example. That's a really big deal to us. And so we do track that kind of stuff carefully.
Cool. So the last thing you said, seek time being a really big deal to you. Especially as we talk about A/B testing around features and what you're looking for when you do these A/B tests. What are you guys optimizing for at a high level? Like what are the most important metrics for you as a business unit, or just as from engineering, either or?
Sure. I guess I can start with that one. At very high level, startup time is extremely important. Minimizing the amount of time for somebody to actually consume the content that they requested. I think that's pretty evident when you look at that one. Rebuffering rates are obviously a very important very important metric to ensure that the quality is where you expect it to be. The amount of plays is obviously a nice metric to ensure that the content is being or the platform is being utilized to expectation. But then, maybe a half step deeper, things like stream switching, and understanding, yes, the video it played quickly. How well was the experience? And that's kind of what we're talking about today specifically is, yes, everything worked, but how well did it work? And how much can we understand without every user calling us and saying, yes, this was a great experience, which is obviously not going to happen. Generally speaking, people are only going to raise their hand when issues occur. So being able to get as much insight from how the entire session went on a global scale, and then digging into that either through specific demographics or specific areas, that is an extremely important feature for us, for sure.
Yeah, I'd also say that error rate is a very critical metric to track, particularly when you're sort of going from being blind on your video performance to starting to have metrics coming in, understanding where users are starting to encounter critical failures in video playback, because often those are occasions where a user may not necessarily reload the page, they may abandon at that point, so certainly trying to avoid those sort of problems, and sort of from that also trying to understand when you have any regressions in your video players or your video stack that may start to impact certain platforms or browsers or things like that.
Yeah, honestly pretty similar. Like ours is rebuffer is number one, start time's number two. The only reason they're in that order for us is because we have a subscription service business, so they're not just going to bounce off, right? So like once we get them in there, we want to keep the experience a little higher. We're also maybe a little weird that stream switching is really important to us. We have coaches that are analyzing minute details in the film, so if they expect high quality and it drops, even just temporary HLS for all of our film, and comes back up, that's actually a bad thing. We'd rather take a buffer hit on that and not have that disoriented experience. If their quality actually needs to drop because their bandwidth is down, then that's totally fine, but like we don't want those momentary blips. So like short stream switches are really bad for us. So we try to track that also.
Yeah, I've been looking at our research that if the people like switch a lot between levels, they stop watching the content to watch the quality. So it's funny. Yeah, I mean, we're basically the same. We don't have enough data to like track the number of switches during the stream. So basically, some of like decisions around levels and bit rates and everything is based on guesswork sometimes, and we use another companies as a base. So for example, we look at like what Dailymotion, YouTube, Netflix is doing, and we kind of do the same. But yeah, it's basically like the startup time is something that's really hard for us because we do have pre-roll, and this hurts a lot, the startup time sometimes. So yeah, this is one thing that we've been like talking a lot about, like how can we improve the startup time, even though we have this like pre-roll thing going on at the business.
Yeah, I certainly also think we're all talking about a lot of the same metrics here, but in general, it's still a big problem in the industry of actually defining how exactly you measure each of these metrics, and is the startup time that we're measuring the same as what anyone else is doing, or the same with understanding what a rebuffer is, or what any of these sort of metrics actually mean, and exactly how they should measure it. So I think it's good that there's groups like the CTA working group that are getting together now to try and actually define standards and write papers around suggested ways to actually measure these, that hopefully eventually the industry at large and multiple vendors can actually implement in the same way, so that we all have consistency when we're talking about what these things actually mean.
So speaking of consistency and definitions here, I mean, so we there's obviously some common threads here around like what are the important metrics you guys track. I'm interested in how you guys actually define what your good experience is, because you're right, I can count the number of times that somebody's like individually reached out and been like, I had a great experience using your product, and I cannot count on one hand the number of times that people have complained. So yeah, like when you're looking at your quality of experience analytics, like what are you striving for in terms of a good experience, and how do you guys define that?
Yeah, I think that's it's always an unanswered question. As the product evolves, as different mediums for delivering and viewing video evolve, at face value, the difference between somebody consuming a standard video as opposed to a live video, as opposed to a 360 video.
It's the long form.
Yeah, exactly. You're kind of always re-estimating your expectations. But I think the biggest source of truth is looking at it from a global perspective, and trying to understand where the outliers are, why they're outliers, and trying to minimize the spectrum of deviation. I think that's the biggest first step for looking at the importance behind all of this.
Yeah, I certainly agree with everything Matt said, and I think sort of overall as an industry, as all the bigger companies are setting such a high sort of customer expectation around video experience and video quality, that quality is getting higher and higher. People are going to 4K, and are trying to stream video everywhere. The Netflix and YouTube and other big companies are delivering such great experiences to so many users that that's setting such a baseline and such a requirement now for the rest of the industry to need to be able to keep up with that.
Yeah, and I agree. It's tough. I mean, I know from our point of view, I wish I had better benchmarks on a lot of these numbers to work towards, what's world class, what's 90th percentile. I don't know if they exist. I don't have them. So from Hudl's point of view, we look at, what do we deem acceptable based on just our knowledge, and try to set our own internal benchmarks. And then just the most important thing is to measure and track against it release to release and over time, and make sure that you're staying within acceptable bounds. And obviously try to push them down whenever you can, clearly, but it's hard. It's kind of put your finger in the air a little bit and look at your competitors. And to your point, I think that the big companies are pushing that bar up really high. It's it's extremely hard to get the video start times that these other big companies are doing. It takes a lot of fancy engineering, and we're certainly not there today. We want to be, but we're not. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you all. It's just like one interesting observation is that we do have different kinds of content, and based on some of the metrics that we have, like the watching metrics, we decided, so one of the goals for us is to grow the young audience at the New York Times. So based on some numbers, we are now releasing videos late night or in the morning, so we can get people that are watching in mobile devices, which in general are younger people. And like the long content, we release during the weekends, so people can have more time to watch them. So, I mean, all of these decisions are made based on numbers. So yeah, it's more like high level, business level decisions, but yeah, it's still like in metrics and stuff.
Cool. So could you guys tell us about a time where, you know, through any of these metrics that you guys think are important, like time that you fixed one and actually saw like what was an experience that you had where you found a bug, found you know, some issue in your system and were able to fix it and actually solve the problem, and like what was the impact on you know, whatever you optimize for. You guys can also start in the middle sometimes.
I got one that happened recently. So we ended up trying out a different CDN partner, and got them in place and noticed that the buffer rate was a little bit higher, but the join time was almost like 40% less, pretty significant actually. And don't exactly know why. I'm guessing that their latency was lowered, all their pops, whatever it was, and immediately saw our exit before video starts drop a significant point. So you can look at it side by side, the two CDN vendors, and you can just, the correlation is so incredibly obvious that, you know, smaller start time leads to less people bouncing off your page. And you know, it's pretty logical, but it's pretty cool to see it in action and actually have the exact same content, two CDN vendors, and see that bounce rate change right off the bat. So that's one that, it's not like a bug or a change we made, but as we're now when I'm looking at CDN vendors, you better believe that's a big part of my analysis process.
Yeah, for us, it can go on two fronts. Some that are impacted by our engineering team specifically, going back to stream switching specifically and modifying configuration values around our internal ABR rules. All of a sudden seeing an incredible oscillation with stream switching, which is obviously not a good experience for users. But on the flip side, seeing the outliers in terms of potential misuse of our product and seeing huge spikes within the metrics. Everybody kind of stops what they're doing and goes into a little bit of a panic mode. But once we spend a couple minutes digging in, pending the tool set is correct and allows us to do so, eventually seeing, hey, this is coming from a single source. Its level of importance for us to jump into is minimal. Everybody can kind of calm down and go back to work, which is generally speaking a nice issue to have. But nevertheless, without a very integrated anomaly detection system, that's something that needs to be manually researched to make that discovery.
So yeah, actually on that note, the anomaly detection stuff. So we spent a lot of time working on anomaly detection. And one of the big things we noticed was things like bots, for example.
Right.
So like we had to, it was this constant game of like, we didn't want to set hard thresholds because then you're too noisy or not noisy enough, right? And so like people don't trust you. So what we found right when we launched anomaly detection was things like bots would happen, and we would just get like crazy number of alerts that meant absolutely nothing. So like slowly working through that, but I'm curious like what you guys are doing with anomaly detection and what you're using it for, but also like what are times that you guys have seen issues in your metrics that have just been total red herrings, so via crawlers or bots or just like product misuse. Yeah, can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from having worked with your anomaly detection system at other companies with real production data, it was certainly able to highlight to us occasions where we had CMS issues or encoding issues, and there were bad assets on our CDNs or bad URLs being generated that were actually breaking video playback for, say, a particular video title or a set of video titles. In some of those cases, we were able to use these anomaly alerting systems to detect these issues and notify our CMS team of these issues so that they could fix it before they even knew that these were actually a problem. And certainly we had also encountered the sort of bot issues, starting to filter those sort of alerts out, with known lists of bot IP ranges and behaviors and user agents and things like that, certainly delivered a sort of cleaner data set to us of alerting.
Yeah, I think it's harder for us to detect anomaly because of the nature of the traffic. We do have a lot of spikes in breaking news, so this is one thing that's a little bit challenging, is to detect anomaly while you're always having traffic and spikes. Yeah. While like the traffic itself is kind of like an anomaly.
Yeah, honestly, we haven't had a lot of luck with anomaly detection. I haven't found it to be super useful from my point of view. Just too many false alarms hasn't proved useful to us personally yet. In terms of metrics that have lied to us, I think in general the metrics are pretty good. The only one that I can think off the top of my head is I remember at one period of time we started to notice our join time creeping up overnight. And we was like, why is our join time creeping up so much? And then it'd go back down during the day and be fine. Well, it turns out that overnight in the US is daytime over in India. And we had an increasing proportion of traffic from Mumbai because we have a team over there that's doing all this film analysis. It's a decent number of people, and their join times are a lot higher. And so it was that was actually statistically significant for that time period, because overnight the rest of the U.S., like at 3 a.m. is so low that we get such small amount of traffic. So that was where the stats looked really bad, but it actually wasn't that big of a deal. So just ignore it and move on.
I think no, go ahead.
I'd certainly say as well, we've certainly seen occasions where we've had high rates of false positives from things like bots, but also from like unsupported browsers and platforms, particularly now with migrations away from Flash and over to HTML5, where if you start supporting only HTML5, but then you get visitors on older browsers that don't support that technology, you may start getting some error rate that actually becomes expected.
I think one of the other things that, taking that one step deeper, is aside from misuse and things like that, specifically looking at it from a video engineer's perspective, seeing a huge drop-off or something like that could easily be attributed to engineering work that was done elsewhere in the pipeline. For instance, if pages weren't rendering because of a new release, that could easily change the metrics for video consumption or video delivery, and it's our responsibility or a data scientist's responsibility to start deducing why that was. And generally speaking, if the front-end engineers made an issue, they're going to focus on fixing that issue right away, not necessarily communicating it to every entity within a larger company to ensure that everybody is on the same page, and that this is a fire that as video engineers need to put out at the moment. So I think that's a pretty important one as well.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about this misuse? I'm interested, what kind of misuse do you guys see it? Is this like a hot linking or something? What's?
A lot of it comes down to making assumptions after our research. I think a good broad example would be people using our service to create displays on televisions. If it was improperly implemented and it's made or it's implemented in a format to continually loop 24/7, and you deploy that, say, at a school campus where there is more than one television that is performing that integration, but nevertheless really sourcing from a single IP. You're wondering how somebody could do that all by themselves, but after some Google searches and some geo lookups, you can kind of start making some assumptions around how that would be misused.
Got it. Cool. So I'm interested in hearing. I imagine this will vary greatly here, but what are metrics that you guys wish you had today and don't?
Sure.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really interested in see is especially regarding like the distribution of bandwidth around the world. So one of the ideas that we are talking about at the office is to release some 4K content, and I'm wondering if we can already like release and people will be able to watch it like.
Because I assume sorry to interrupt, but I assume that you guys have quite a bit of variance in viewership, right? I mean, being the New York Times, you need to, rather as opposed to, like Brian, you have a very different user base that you can kind of set your low bar to, but you have to be able to support kind of everyone that wants to come to the New York Times.
Yeah, exactly. We need to be able to deliver the video around the globe. So like we need to be especially careful with like South America, for example, and I mean, we've been talking about having different manifests for different locations in the world. So for example, the people in Brazil, they will watch the 720 at like the highest level, while here in America, we can use like the 4K or 1080p and stuff like that. So I think that we need to like invest some more time in some kind of like data analytics to support this kind of decisions in the future, in the near future, basically. So we are already like creating content in 4K. So we already have some content to release in 4K if we have the technology and if we have good numbers around like people that are able to play this 4K content.
Yeah, it's tough. I would say it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but understanding industry benchmarks better would be a metric I would really like. We talked a little bit about stream switching and like the frequency of stream switching. A lot of our ability to gather that is somewhat manual right now within our own tools. I'd love to have better tooling around that to analyze that. Like I said, a lot of that's manual right now for us. So that would be one I would have for sure.
I'd say for me, understanding advertising performance is something we don't necessarily have enough insights into today. We get very high-level sort of metrics on error rates that, code X error, but that doesn't necessarily always tell us enough to actually fix some of those problems. But also understanding, when is poor advertising performance affecting users, and then when is that leading to users abandoning our content before they even get through a pre-roll advertisement. And that's particularly important, I think, when some of the advertising is going to be programmatic, so it's not necessarily all household ads or directly controlled advertising. How can we make sure that we're still only going to deliver ads to customers that will give a reasonable experience and not lead to our business facing the penalty of abandonment and lost revenue because of our advertising that we're delivering?
I think at face value, one metric that would be very important to both engineering and our platform as it's user-generated content is reasons for abandonment. Getting a clear understanding as to why people are leaving videos, whether it's an issue with the quality of service or whether it's the content in general that was just uninteresting to an end user. Aside from that, a semi-more far-fetched but related metric that would be, I think, very insightful would be something like optical tracking. Looking at how people are actually looking at the experience and just a more in-depth nature. Now, you can kind of start seeing this in the world of 360 or VR video and understanding where people are looking and why. And as this paradigm of video playback continues to evolve, especially with extremely high quality video and potentially unique adaptive bitrate solutions around that, I think that'll become more and more popular, as far-fetched as it seems today.
Yeah, just one observation around 360. We do release one 360 video a day, and sometimes we release the same video on Facebook as well, and it's interesting that they generate a heat map of like where like people are watching the video. So basically we're doing storytelling in 360, so this is really useful for us to be like driving the decisions around the creation of the content based on where like the people will look at, basically. So it's
Where to
really-
place annotations and things like that.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I struggle with like 360 video as a medium for that reason, right? Like I'm always worried I'm looking at the wrong place.
Exactly. Right.
I have FOMO during like while watching content. So yeah, we've talked about metrics that you wish you had. Like what metrics do you wish you didn't have? Like what's a thing that you see on a dashboard every day that you hate and you wish you could ignore but you can't?
Oh, buffering. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think if you're doing the best you possibly could, obviously video would never buffer for anybody, no matter what ISP, where they are geographically. And with that, they would have a quality of experience that was good, right? That's obviously not going to happen. But buffering is always one challenge. Startup time is another one as well, which is semi-related. But no one likes to see that they're delivering content that is consistently stuttering. So that's one that's never going to go away.
So before we keep going online, I'm curious, like what do you guys see as what is your red flag marker for buffering? Is it like a hard line, like this many buffers in a view, this many buffers per minute of streaming? Like what is your
Yeah, without like going into exact specifics, I think it's a culmination between the sum of rebuffering events along with the sum of time spent within those rebuffering events. If we can minimize the amount of time that is spent in those events, inherently I think you're going to see a decrease in early drop-off of consumption. So yeah, it's another one of those things that I think as a static number will continue to evolve. It's also dynamic between what kind of content is being consumed. If you're watching an hour-long video, the difference between 5 buffer events against a video that's a minute long is very different. So yeah, I think it's something that's always evolving. Cool.
Yeah, I think error rate's obviously very critical, and you never want that to really be there at all. If everyone is always getting a video playback that always works, I think that's the ideal world. The quality of experience is what we're all trying to optimize now, but I think the baseline there is the video needs to start playing. And
low bar? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's a low bar, but I think that's something that doesn't still necessarily always happen. Video delivery is becoming more and more complicated today. As we're now, probably no one here is delivering one video format or one way of getting video to every device and platform that you support. There's now HLS, there's Dash, there's probably still some smooth streaming and HDS and other things like that out there. The video landscape and video delivery is becoming more and more complicated all the time. We're now starting to talk about next-gen codecs. People starting to do VP9 and HEVC, where on Android, some of the initial hardware decoders actually had more errors and more performance problems than some of the initial software decoders. So, there's a lot of areas to kind of watch now, and as new browsers get released, regressions in different versions of Chrome or Firefox or things like that can have significant impacts on fatal video error rates.
Yeah, I don't have a ton more to add on this one, honestly, than what's already been said. I think, buffer is clearly important to us. It's a little challenging because our users seek so much in the video that there's a certain amount of innate buffering that's almost expected. That you just, if you're in a 2-hour-long video and you seek 200 times, which is literally not unusual for our users, you're gonna get some buffering at some point. So it's a little bit interesting for us on that. And we do a lot to try to look at messing with our segment size is a big deal to us on our HLS streams to try to optimize for that. A lot of people mess with segment size to optimize for latency of delivery. That's actually not an issue for us. So we're literally looking at seeking performance based on segment size.
Cool. Yeah, the tough part of being the last one is that there's nothing you can say anymore. But yeah, I mean, I agree with all of you guys, especially on the buffering thing and the correlation with like the type of the content and, for example, the startup time. I mean, if the content is long enough, like more than 10 minutes, you can have a bigger startup time because people will wait to watch this long content. So it's like, it's really interesting to see this kind of correlation between the startup time, rebuffering events, and the type of content itself, and the length of the content. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I think that's all we got time for. But thank you all for joining us. If you're an engineer working in video, we have a community of meetups all across the world. I see the Stream Root guys in here somewhere. They run one in Paris. The JW Player guys run one here in New York called New York Video. We have one in San Francisco called SF Video. So yeah, if you're interested in joining any of those, shoot me an email, matt@demux.com, and I can route you to the right person based on your city. So, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.